Hi, friends. I know how isolating the path of healing can be after experiencing spiritual abuse as you carry religious trauma in your body. And you are not alone. I want to invite you to join me in Richmond, Virginia on Friday and Saturday, October 10th and 11th for the Broken to Beloved Gathering. This is a special 2-day event designed for those who've been hurt or harmed in the church and for their advocates. If you're looking for practical tools to help process the pain and trauma of spiritual abuse, then this is the event for you. We are creating a safe and compassionate space for you to hear empowering sessions, learn embodied practices, discover community and connection, and more. You'll get to hear from amazing speakers like J.S. Park, Rachel Clinton Chen, Laura Barringer, and lots more. Early bird tickets are available now at a discounted rate, and seating is limited, so get your tickets today. If you can't join us in person, we do have live stream tickets available for you. Just go to brokentobeloved.org for more information and to get your tickets today. Join us as we move toward healing and wholeness together. I hope to see you there.
Healing is understanding your worth and your lovability and what to do when you feel those feelings. That's what I believe healing is. And we have this idea that really excludes a lot of people that healing is just always feeling better. Healing is always feeling good. And that's not only not realistic, it's not really fair or attainable. So, you may feel something for the rest of your life, but that is not a failure. And that does not mean you haven't healed. That is just part of it. Things that we go through change us. They don't determine our worth or our lovability, but they do impact us. And it's really freeing to be able to accept and name and allow that to be true.
Hey friends, welcome back to the Broken to Beloved podcast. If you're looking for practical resources for recovery from and safeguarding against spiritual abuse, then this is the place for you. I'm your host, Brian Lee. As an ordained pastor and fellow survivor, I know what it feels like navigating life after spiritual abuse. I also know what it's like to want to prevent anything from happening to the people you know and love. It's why Broken to Beloved exists. And we can't do it alone. We need your help. Support our work by becoming a donor to help make our podcast and programs possible. Just head to brokentobeloved.org/support or click the link to donate in the show notes. Today, we're talking about finding ways to name our pain. Monica DiCristina has been a practicing therapist for over 15 years. She's also a sought-after speaker, podcaster, and writer on topics of emotional healing and mental health. Combining her extensive therapeutic knowledge with creativity, empathy, storytelling, and her deeply rooted faith, she is passionate about walking alongside those who are unraveling their difficult experiences and providing a path for them to do the brave and sacred work of transformation and healing. And now, here's my conversation with our new friend, Monica. Monica, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm really excited to be here.
Same. I'm excited for this conversation. We were talking briefly before I hit record about how I saw your book title from multiple different sources through the algorithm.
Yeah.
And just based on the work we're doing, to be able to name our pain is such a huge part of the healing and recovery process.
Yes.
So I knew I wanted to talk to you, and I'm really excited for this.
Great. I love that.
Right up front, you say that pain is an invitation to find names for your pain, which is the first step to returning home to who you were made to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that you use the word invitation.
Yeah.
Because we so often think of pain as a bad thing.
Yes.
But it can be a signal, it can be a sign, and I love that. Pain is an invitation. Just tell us more about kind of your intent in this.
Yeah, I think you're right on that. We're often taught to run from pain. We're taught that it's a failure to feel pain. We're implicitly or explicitly taught that we've done something wrong if we're in pain, or we're not doing enough things right. And so in all of that confusing messaging about pain, we often skip over what indeed is hurting. Mm-hmm. And when we skip over it, we don't get a chance to name it, to understand it, and then to figure out what we need. So I really do believe pain is often an unwanted invitation. I'm not going to pretend like this is someone knocking at our door that we're excited to see. But when we learn to be less afraid of pain and more open to it and more compassionate to ourselves, I've seen in my own life and in so many people's lives that I work with, we often get to a new and steadier and more healed place when we listen to pain instead of numbing or running away.
I love that. And you tell a story right up front about becoming a Christian, desperate for help, right? Looking for the help. And you tell this story of being with this pastor in the church office and being shushed. And I
Yeah.
personally felt the heat of that shame when
Yeah.
you talked about being shushed. So when you talk about listenings, like when we have no idea, because so much of this pain is magnified when we are bypassed, that pain is
Yes.
bypassed, right? So when we have no idea what to do with someone's story or someone's pain, what can be a helpful response?
Oh, I love this question. When we don't understand what's going on with someone, I think one of the best gifts we can give them is to say, I can tell you're hurting. I'm not sure I know what's going on, but I'm going to stick
Mm,
with you until you find out or find someone who does. So
mhm.
we refuse to abandon them to the pain. We refuse to shame them for the pain, but we also refuse to oversimplify their story to our limited knowledge. And I think we underestimate how helpful we can be by admitting that we don't know how to be helpful, but we'll stick with you until you find help.
So helpful and so much more compassionate than the bypassing that we get. Or
Yes.
I think you also tell the story about or give an example of the pastor who was not afraid to admit that he didn't know, but let's find you help.
Yes, yes, yes. That was my friend from college, my college roommate, but she brought us to a pastor. And she was such a great example to me. And I've told her in years since, that she had no idea what was going on with me. Neither did
Mm,
I. But she refused to leave me alone in it. And she refused to oversimplify it to her own knowledge. She said, let's try to figure this out together.
yeah. And what a beautiful invitation, again, to not be left alone in your
Yes.
pain, but to feel like you
Yeah.
have a compassionate witness. And especially when we're carrying or dealing with trauma with the lack of that empathetic witness, right?
Yes, absolutely. And pain can be so isolating. I think
Mm,
that becomes almost a secondary pain that so many people are experiencing is that they're left alone in it because they're embarrassed about it or
hmm
because no one knows what to do with them.
hmm And I think, especially in church environments, there's so much emphasis on certainty and
Yes.
so much emphasis on having the right answer or God just being the answer to everything.
Yes.
And we're not saying that he's not, but also like it's okay to not know how to handle someone's story or their pain and just say, I wish I knew what I could tell you. All I can do is
Yes.
be here with you.
That's right. That's right. And I just think we're often so well-meaning. We really want to be
Yes.
helpful and we really want to relieve people's suffering.
hmm
But when we don't really know what's going on, the best way to relieve their suffering is not to add to it,
Yeah.
right? With our
Yeah.
own limited understanding.
Yeah. And I appreciate even that you see that,
Hmm.
the good intent in people like that pastor in the church basement with the secretary outside the open door who shushes you, maybe not to shame you, but because, like, oh, we don't want to talk about this in front of this other person. But
Right.
just knowing how it comes across and feels for you in that moment and being able to have that empathy for other people who come to us with their stories or to know maybe what to expect if we have a story we want to share with someone else.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think most people mean well, but
hmm
we're almost, I think there's too much pressure on each of us to be so helpful. Right. And I think
hmm
that is an important thing to relieve ourselves of so
Yeah.
that we can help people find the right help.
Yeah. And this is related, but we see what we know how to see,
That's right.
right?
That's
And
right.
you write that we also see what we want to see and
Yep.
how those limitations keep us from finding what we need, both in professional settings and in personal relationships.
Yes.
And when I read that part of the book, I'm thinking of all these therapists and all these modalities and all these
Yes.
practices that are out there that you hear about. Or it's like, oh, you should try this. This is working for everyone. Or this is so hot right now. So whether it's EMDR or IFS or story work or talk therapy or
Yeah.
somatic practices, it's
Yep.
like there's all these different things that we end up like, if all I have is a hammer, everything is a nail.
That's right. Exactly. Exactly. And I think that you point out something that's really important to name too is it's not just in church settings, but it's in therapeutic settings,
hmm
or even just your best friend went to EMDR and now thinks you need EMDR, that we
Right.
really think it's as simple as the newest thing. And I wish it was, I wish it
hmm
was, but it's always a lot more complex than that.
It is. Well, and you also write, perfect little segue, is that complexity is not a liability.
That's
It's an
right.
important door to finding what you need. And if it doesn't feel right, keep looking. And again, I just love how invitational and grace filled that is.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that just like you said about certainty, we want to simplify things. We want it to be easy. We want it to be 1, 2, 3 steps to healing. And listen, that's attractive to me too. I wish that that was true, but so often it's not, because you and I, sitting here, we both have our own stories, and we
Hmm.
both have our own complex stories. And so if we were to simplify one thing as a fix for both of us, it might help a little bit, but it might not help that much depending on our own stories, right?
Yeah. And again, so that's why I appreciate the invitation that just because your story is complex, it doesn't mean it has to be impossible.
That's right.
It's just one step at a time, one name at a time, one thing at a time. Invite yourself into that process to find out what's at the root of it.
That's right. And I think that, we're so often not comfortable enough, or not taught to be comfortable enough with not knowing yet, right? And so the complexity feels scary if we don't know
Mm.
what's going on with us, if we don't know what we need. I think
Hmm.
the more that we can normalize, sometimes you don't know yet.
Yeah.
Sometimes things are hard, or things happened in your church or in your life, and you don't know yet what it was, but something doesn't feel right. And the permission to be in that, I don't know, but something feels off, is really important.
Yeah. So let's talk about naming things.
Okay.
Where in the world do we start when we have no idea, or we don't have language, or we haven't had that light bulb moment yet?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, there's a lot of places to start. One is therapy, others books, other are talking to friends. But I think that first, understanding that if you're hurting and you don't have a name for it, starting to listen to what are the stories it's telling about you. Because so often
Mm.
when we don't have a name for what hurt or what happened, what we do have are a bunch of stories and narratives about ourselves from those experiences. And
Yes.
sometimes that is, if we don't, we may not yet know the diagnosis or know the name for what happened to us in this place, but we know what we're walking around hearing and echoing in our minds and
Mm.
hearts. And sometimes we start by naming that. Well, gosh, I feel like I've lost a sense of my own lovability or worthiness since I've been a part of this group. That's interesting. I need to pay attention to that. And then sometimes that's how we walk it back to naming. But I think, naming in general is going to be, I talk about this in the book, it's like Sherlocking your life. It's going to be
Yeah.
an investigative journey that is not necessarily going to fix things, but is going to give you a huge amount of psychological relief by understanding yourself.
Hmm. I love that. And I think you write somewhere at the end of the book this idea of counterfeits. That the
Yeah.
way that we discover this path to our true self, or our
Hmm.
real self, learning how to spot a fake, is by
Yeah.
staring at a real one every single day. So, how do we learn to see that version of ourselves when all we know is the pain?
Yeah. And this is going to be a long answer because I'm a therapist
Go
and
for
I
it.
can't give a short answer, but we get to our true selves by first naming the pain, because what I find is that very often we're buried underneath it. Right? Who we really
Mm.
are has to be excavated. It's not that it ever changed. It's not that it ever
Hmm.
wasn't lovely or lovable, but it was buried underneath. So I think how we get to that true self is by naming the counterfeits, but the counterfeits are often what happened to you and no one took credit for,
Yeah.
what is happening to you currently, but you don't understand the stories you've carried around in yourself about yourself. And those create such a foggy confusion that it's hard to know, who indeed am I? Right. And
Mm.
so it's the person underneath, it's the person before, it's the person in spite of the pain. That is how you kind of get down to who you really are. And I think what's interesting is that sounds sometimes so out there, but I think what is interesting is that I find over and over again that people are more able to attach and understand that than they expect, right? It's like hearing an old familiar song when you begin to return to who you really are. You really
Mm.
start to recognize it more easily.
Yeah. Well, and I think you also write about this whole idea of visualizing walking down the hill
Yeah.
toward yourself, right? And you say
Yes.
your pain is the way home, and arriving to be with yourself. And what
Yes.
I hear so often from our community is that when they've experienced abuse, when they carry trauma, like you said at the beginning, it can be so isolating.
It can.
And sometimes the shame or the weight of the pain isolates us even further. And
Hmm.
then if you do try to tell the story and you get shushed or you get bypassed, it shuts you down. It's like, well, I'm never doing that again.
Exactly. Yes.
And so I often hear because in healing spaces, in therapy places, you hear all the time, it's like, well, connection is the way, relationships is like, but I've tried and I can't do it. So I love that you offer this way back home, if nowhere else, that you start with yourself.
Thank you for saying that, Brian. I think that that is such an important thing that we often miss. Yes, connection is important. Yes, it is how we're wired. But what you're naming, no pun intended right now, is that so many people, they don't have that. That is their pain. That isolation or being kicked out of the group or leaving the group is their pain. And so one of the things we really underestimate is that we can be a good friend to ourselves, not in a cheesy way, but in a way where you show up and you refuse to leave yourself, where you walk down the hill to yourself and you say, what's going on? What do I need? Where am I hurting? And I'm going to stick with myself until I figure it out with some help. Right. And I think that that is so important that we, it can feel cheesy to listen to yourself and be a friend to yourself, but truly, I think it's one of our greatest resources, and it builds self-trust and it builds a sense of stability inside of yourself when you learn to do that.
When we find a way to do that, when we imagine walking down the hill to ourselves, to be a witness to our own pain and say something hurts, how do we start to figure out where do we get the dictionary on naming pain? I remember, I think one of the first books my counselor talked about spiritual abuse, and the light bulbs all go off. It's like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what it is. And then you start looking for all the books talking about it, getting all other kinds of vocabulary.
Yeah.
What's a good place for people to start when they don't know what to name it?
Well, I think that it's a fantastic question. And I think it depends on the pain, right?
Yeah.
It depends on the type of pain. Like your example is a perfect example, because one of the things that helps all of us is our books, our podcasts like this. And it's really essential to be able to not limit your knowledge, but to be curious and to go out and look. And so one of the most difficult things about writing this book for me was that I couldn't name every pain.
Sure.
Listen, I tried, got a little too long. But one of the most important things that we can do is really become investigative. So whether it's with a therapist, whether it's with books, what I write in the beginning of my book is that every good knowledge that I've come into contact with is actually a type of naming, whether it's teaching you about trauma, whether it's teaching you about spiritual abuse. And so if you're someone that's hurting, I would start with reading. If, therapy can be a privilege that not everyone can get to, but if you can, to go to therapy. If not, to, those one or two close friends that, are knowledgeable, not that you're looking for them to fix it, but you can say, this is what I've been struggling with, and where would you direct me to learn more about this? And that it's really as simple as that, because in contrast to that, there's isolation, there's shame, there's not understanding, there's continued and prolonged and magnified suffering. So although it sounds like really simple things to do, it's really those first steps. And like you described, you read one book and then many books. That's what I see when people begin to understand things. It's like this beautiful set of dominoes. Oh my gosh, this is what is happening with me. And now I understand this is how I respond in relationships. And now I understand this. And it really is a process that goes on pretty much continually as we continue to learn about ourselves.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think another really good one is we all came from somewhere.
Yes.
And we talk about family of origin, right? So I love how you talk about redrawing your inner map.
Yeah.
And you are not your family.
That's right.
And so I talk a lot about GPS in my coaching, this idea that it can show you where you are, where you want to go, where you've been. And the problem is it can't help you at all unless you start moving.
That's right.
And if you have a starting point. And in a coaching call recently, we had this conversations that someone was so lost, they had no idea where they were. They had no orientation. I was like, can you get in a plane and get a 30,000-foot view?
Right.
Like if you have are you even on the right map? When you look down at the landscape, do you belong in the desert or in the mountains or over the prairies? Like and then slowly, just by identifying something, how close can you get to have some kind of starting point? Tell us how you think about the inner map and how it helps us to figure out where we are and how to name things.
Yeah, well, I think, the inner map in relation to our first families is that, we're given a way to interact with ourselves and the world. And until we explore that, we're doing it subconsciously or without even realizing it. And so being able to first identify what's the map I was given. Like our first family is really our first social group. And we all had to adapt in some way or some form, some more than others, some less. And
Mm-hmm.
so once we begin to understand that, we begin to see, how have I adapted in a way that impacts my relationships now, that impacts how I talk to people now. And once we're able to identify that old map, then we can redraw it. And I know this is not a 1, 2, 3 step. This is involves coaching and therapy and a long process, but we can begin to redraw how it is that we believe about ourselves, how it is we will believe about relationships, and create a completely different direction. But the theme again is that we cannot change directions. We cannot figure out our new map until we've really identified the one that we're carrying around in our backpack. Because we're all carrying one. We're all carrying an understanding of, who am I? And who can I trust? Who can I not trust? Am I worthy? Am I lovable? We're all carrying around answers about that may or may not be examined yet. And so learning to examine those first is how we begin to redraw the map.
Yeah. And I love that as you talk about family of origin, there's this question that gets asked that, did you get what you needed?
Yes.
Or what you needed that your caregivers couldn't give you. But the real kicker for me was the follow-up that you said, what was the story you told yourself about that unmet need?
Yes.
Tell us more about that. Like, can you provide examples of stories to help our listeners understand this for themselves?
So many of us don't get what we need, right, when growing up. And the thing is that there's not an all-knowing narrator that interrupts your life and says, hey, you didn't get what you needed because mom had to work or because dad had a drinking problem. You are left as a child to conclude a reason why you didn't get what you needed. And children by nature are egocentric. So they believe everything is about them and everything is their fault. And so if you didn't get what you needed, you're going to begin to tell yourself stories about that. About, well, hey, when, if mom got really mad when she got home from work, maybe it's just because I didn't do everything perfectly enough. Maybe I didn't clean up enough, right? Or if dad was really uninterested in me, maybe it's because I'm just not that interesting or that lovable. And so if we don't first understand and name that this thing happened from my parents to me, we begin to conclude it was because of me. It was because of a deficiency in me, that they were not able to love me well, that they were not able to give me what I needed. Does that make sense?
Too much.
Yeah.
Too much sense. Well, but I also love now that you separate lovability, or what we talk about all the time as belovedness, from our caregiver's ability or inability to love us well, to separate our pain from our identity. And I love that you're right, that their inability to love you well is about them and not you.
Yes. Yeah, because so often when you have someone who can't love you well, but they're not taking responsibility for that, you, like a really good, responsible child, you take that responsibility as your own. You think, well, gosh, I mean, someone's to blame for how bad this relationship makes me feel. Maybe it's me, right?
Yeah.
But I think that is something that is so important to tease apart, is that sometimes people are really, for their own unresolved issues, not able to love us well. But that has nothing to do with how lovable you are as a person, or were as a child, or are as a church member, or are as a friend. It has to do with that person's ability and what's going on in their lives.
And I think that's so important because we don't even realize that's what we're carrying around with us.
100%. Yes.
It's just the story we've been telling ourselves since we were children, and then trying to make up for the lack of it.
Yes.
Looking for answers anywhere, really.
Exactly. And hearing that story we've been telling ourselves since we were children is really essential. It's like hearing a sound machine in the hallway. Once you start to notice that you hear it, you can't unhear it, right? And so it's really important that we don't carry around those unexamined stories longer than we have to.
Yeah. Let's talk about trauma, because everyone it's such a fun topic.
It's an important one.
It is very important, and I love that you go into the nuances of different types of trauma, how it happens, how we carry it, and at the same time, because People often talk about little t trauma, big T trauma. My trauma wasn't as bad as theirs, or look at what this person had to deal with, so I should just get over it. And I love that you say it's wasted time to
It is.
litigate the size, type, or
Mm-hmm.
validity of an event as trauma or not, when
Yes.
the answer to whether or not it was trauma is embedded in your body's response to it. And I
Yes.
love that you have this concept that you do not bounce back or, quote, go back to normal after
No.
trauma, that it's more like a wire hanger than a Nerf ball. So
Mm-hmm.
for people who are carrying that trauma, who are desperate to find a way back
Mm-hmm.
or a way out or whatever it is,
Mm-hmm.
help us to understand what life looks like and how we reshape or get reshaped after that.
Yeah, I think that the sort of the antiquated idea is you bounce back, right?
Yeah.
And that's just not fair or true. And it ends up people feeling really badly about themselves when they don't bounce back
Mm-hmm.
after trauma. What is a more realistic idea is that you build a new road next to the traumatic road. You build a brand new road of new associations in your brain, new associations in relationships, new ideas about your identity. And then the old road, it's still there. And when you get triggered, maybe you go back to the old road for a few minutes, but you've built
Mm-hmm.
this new, true, beautiful road that is indeed healing. And it's really unfair to people who have experienced any kind of trauma for them to think that they are able to just bounce back, because it ends up people feeling like a failure if they're still struggling,
Yeah.
when there's no failure. And it in fact makes perfect sense and is how trauma works. It does rewire your brain. And so healing is going to look different than this sort of old idea of a bounce back.
And I think, again, especially in the church world,
Yeah.
that there is just so much spiritual bypassing that happens, that there is
Yes.
very little room for grief or
Yes.
loss. And the windows of time are so short. It's like, oh, are you still thinking about that? Are you still sad about that? Are you not over that yet? It's like, this, I'm going to carry this with me for the rest of my life and I will never look
Abs-
the same. And
absolutely.
just having the freedom to recognize that and to be
Mm-hmm.
okay with it, I think will be just so liberating for people to hear.
Yes. Yes. And that healing is not the absence of pain. Healing is not the absence of
Mm,
struggle. Healing is understanding your worth and your lovability and what to do when you feel those feelings. That's what I believe healing is. And we have this idea that really excludes a lot of people, that healing is just always feeling better. Healing is always
yeah.
feeling good. And that's not only not realistic, it's not really fair or attainable. So, you may feel something for the rest of your life, but that is not a failure. And that does not mean you haven't healed. That is just part of it. That things that we go through change us. They don't determine our worth or our lovability, but they do impact us. And it's really freeing to be able to accept and name and allow that to be true.
Healing is not the absence of pain.
It's
That is
not.
so important.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
think so often people get dismissed in one way or another when they do try to name their pain, right? And I love that you say dismissal is more about someone else's discomfort with your
Mm-hmm.
hard thing than
Yes.
with the validity of your feelings.
Yes.
And then you give us a continuum of dismissal. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, what I sit down when I sit down with clients all the time, I find that so many of them are telling me a different version of the same story. That something
Mm,
hard happened and people didn't treat them well about it. And this goes across a continuum from minimizing, like it's not that big of a deal, all the way to gaslighting, which is really blaming them and making them doubt their own understanding of reality. And so I think one of the most important things that we can learn how to do is to recognize when we're being dismissed or
mm,
invalidated or spiritually bypassed. Because when we go to someone else and we're hurting and they say, oh, you're just overreacting, oh, it's not that big of a deal, you're isolated. And then you also begin to doubt your own experience of reality. You begin to doubt the validity of your pain. And what you don't get is the help that you really need.
yeah.
And this is a chapter in this book that I have heard the most from people about, because sadly, we don't know how to help each other when we're in pain. We get very uncomfortable,
Yeah.
right? When someone else is hurting, we're sometimes our worst selves because we're so anxious to end their suffering that we do all kinds of things that are
Mm,
not helpful, like spiritually bypass them or minimize it or invalidate them, because it's so uncomfortable to see someone we care about in pain. And so the more comfortable we can get with discomfort, with our own pain or someone else's pain, the better we're able to serve and to help each other when we're hurting.
So when we are dismissed,
Yeah.
When we feel the weight of that shame, what is a way to find our way out of that? And then I have a follow up after.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, one of the ways is to learn to validate yourself. Again, this could sound a little bit cheesy, but it's really not. It's really freeing that even if this person is unwilling or unable to see what I experienced, I can still hold the truth myself.
Mm-hmm.
I can still validate. I don't have to have an internal argument with myself about whether or not this happened, about whether or not it's true, or about whether or not it wasn't okay. Right? That I can actually learn to validate my own self. And that takes practice, especially when we have, many of us, been taught to put other people's opinions as more important than our own. So it takes practice. It's not an easy 1, 2, 3 step.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the follow up is, how do we become better listeners? When someone brings their pain to us, how do we listen better?
Mm-hmm.
And then how do we respond better?
Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the things that we can do to listen better is to be less concerned with what we're going to say than what that person is saying.
There it is.
Yep. And also to listen with our whole self, our whole presence. When you are trying to rehearse how you're going to be helpful to this person, you're already missing half of what they're saying. You're missing their body language, right? And so learning how to just be present with someone is one of the most helpful ways. And then the next is being curious without judgment. So often we think we're being curious, but we're really being judgmental. And so being curious and tell me more. What happened? How did that feel for you? And again, refusing to rush to oversimplified solutions.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Let's talk about creative strategies.
Okay, yeah.
Because this, for me, again, was such a lovely reframing of what we typically hear talk about survival strategies or coping mechanisms. And the idea that you would bring creativity into this to say, what a creative strategy you've come up with that is not just there to help you survive, but you're trying to actively do something. And I love the Courtney Armstrong idea that the symptoms are allies.
Yes.
Normally we think of symptoms as, oh my gosh, something's wrong with me.
Huge problem. Right. And it doesn't mean that symptoms don't cause suffering, because it's really important to say that they often can, but it's that they're trying to help us. And so creative strategies is my way of understanding and naming, so that it doesn't feel so shameful, how it is we figured out to cope. So whether it is from your family of origin or from the last group you were a part of, if something didn't feel good and something felt off, you developed a way to survive that environment as well as you could. And that often looks like a strategy interpersonally, or a strategy in yourself to make it through that relationship and to make it through the next point. And so often we're way too hard on ourselves about those creative strategies. But what I really wanted to name those in the book was brilliant strategies, because that's what I say to my clients. My editor told me that she would think that people might think I was being sarcastic, but I wasn't. That I really think that they are brilliant strategies. So maybe let's take one that's really common, is people pleasing and having no boundaries, right? That is something that people are so hard on themselves about.
Yeah.
But I would prefer to get curious. Why did you develop that creative strategy?
Yeah.
My suspicion is at some point you needed it. You needed to be a people pleaser to feel loved, or so that someone wouldn't lose their temper at you. Right. And so it's what we develop that we then, in our next chapters as adults, we often have outgrown. And these creative strategies can be more like a t-shirt that fit us when we were 8 years old that no longer fits. Right. It was brilliant then. We needed it, but it just doesn't work as well now.
Yeah. And I love the kind of external, internal patterns that you name for us, like blaming is an external thing, shaming is an internal one, controlling is external, but escape and chaos can be internal. And I just love the idea that when we can recognize, become aware of, and notice that we do these things at all, then we can move to give those things a name. And it's like, oh, I'm recognizing the thing I do. And instead of shaming myself for it, I can just say, oh, ta-da, I'm doing the thing I always do.
Yep.
Of course I am, because look at what's happening around me.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's that self-compassionate posture of naming that I think really helps people exhale, it doesn't fix you, but it helps you feel more free, able to love yourself and figure out what you need. So, blame and shame and control and chaos are ways that we all cope with pain. We all cope with feeling bad about ourselves. And once we begin to recognize that, it's not so scary, right? It's just like, oh, here it is again, just like you said. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the chapter on boundary issues felt like a revelation to me.
Oh, good.
It was, it's not just about the boundary or why some people are so good at them or so bad at them, but just getting underneath, like you're saying, to the why do I have this boundary in this first place?
Yes.
And then you say you're looking to create a sense of emotional safety. And I was like, oh my gosh, is that really what the boundary is?
I think for so many of us, we're so hard on ourselves about boundaries, but really it was a way to be safe and to be loved is to be so pleasing to someone and to say yes, that you would be kept in the fold, that you would not be rejected, you would not be yelled at, right? You would find a way to create emotional safety. And so it's a waste of time. And we all know at this point, boundaries, we should have boundaries, right? Everyone's talking about it. But it's a waste of time to be hard on ourselves about it when we can really start to heal and change when we get curious about why.
Yeah.
Why was it actually brilliant for you to have no boundaries at some point? Once you begin to name that, you can understand how to change because that doesn't work anymore.
Yeah. And we were just talking with Meg in February. She's a trauma-informed writing coach about this idea of boundaries. And for people who have had no boundaries and are starting to understand why and are starting to need to put them in place and maybe say no for the first time to someone who's too involved or too much inserting themselves in your lives, that it may not feel good.
Yes, that's right.
And there's this Holly Whitaker quote that she shares, saying no to people who want you to say yes, upholding your boundaries with people who are used to having none will feel at first terrible and like death.
Yes.
And this idea of we can do things that are healthy and good for us and not feel good about it. And so even being able to name that kind of pain to say, actually, this is a healthy step for me. This is surgery is not going to feel good.
That's right.
And yet it is the thing that is going to save my life right now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we're taught that the right decision always feels good. And that's just not true. That the right decision is often really difficult and it can often really disappoint other people. And if you're not been comfortable disappointing other people, that can feel really scary and overwhelming. And, I even have in my informed consent for therapy that you may start to change and that may be hard for some people in your life, because when we change or when we have boundaries, it can be difficult for people who are used to us being one way.
I love the hope that you provide. Towards the end, you say you needed an answer for why you felt bad. And shame provided one.
Yeah.
But it wasn't true. Because here's the truth. You're not bad. You're not a hopeless failure. There's nothing wrong with you. And there never was, because that wasn't the problem. The problem was the problem. What a declaration of liberation and freedom and hope. Because for years, I told myself I'm damaged goods. I'm utterly broken and this is my identity.
Yeah.
And it wasn't for years that I was able to recognize and reclaim this idea of belovedness, that actually broken is not who I am. It's something that happened to me, but that was the problem. It's not me.
That's right.
Help us to understand that.
You just gave the most beautiful example of it, that, in the absence of naming the problem for what it was, you took on an identity.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so essential to name the problem as the problem, whatever it is, and it could be anything. Once you begin to do that, then who you actually are, it begins to open, right? Because, the problem isn't you and you're still there, still lovable, having experienced really hard things, but that doesn't at all change who you've always been. So I think it's essential, especially if people have been hurt by others, is being able to say, that was a problem. Yes, that really hurt, but that was never who I was. I was never bad or broken or shameful, but I was hurt and I was carrying a lot of hard things.
Yeah. And I think for people who are coming out of really legalistic backgrounds or churches or patriarchal societies where they're just kind of always being pushed down, or maybe they already live on the margins of things. It's such a big thing to overcome or to accept that idea. It's like, I'm not bad.
Yes. Yes. Gosh. I mean, I wish I could just pass that out, and maybe we're doing that right now.
Mm-hmm.
That so often, especially if you have, a trauma history or an anxiety history or a shame history, if you're in a legalistic place, you're going to be walking around with a sense that you're bad.
Yeah.
And I just don't believe that that's the voice of God saying that. I really don't. I think that that is wounding, and I think it's really important for people to be able to understand the difference, right?
Yeah.
The difference between wanting to change your behaviors and being just bad, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love the way that you write about tenderness.
Mm-hmm.
That it's this greatest defense that we have against all pain, which sounds counterintuitive.
It
Like,
does.
it's pain. I should put up the armor. I should get the barriers. I should white knuckle and try harder through all of these things, right? Like Andy Colbert talks about. And yet the tenderness refuses to shut down, to deny anyone's humanity. It honors our pain. Tell us more about how we move through this naming with tenderness.
Yeah, I think that it's really tempting to numb. It's tempting to numb
Yeah.
ourselves to our own pain and to the pain in the world at large. There's so much pain. There's pain that we can relate to and pain that we'll never be able to relate to, depending on who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And so tenderness is essential because it is counterintuitive. We want to steel ourselves really strong when we're feeling pain, but then the healing never gets in. Right. And so tenderness is allowing yourself not only to be soft with your own pain, but with the pain of others. And I've found that the more comfortable and tender you are with your own self, the more open and comfortable you are with the suffering of other people. And therefore, the more helpful you can be to other people. It's really tenderness that leads us to do acts of compassion or acts of service or to help other people. We have to keep our hearts tender, even when we've been through things that would make our hearts not want to be tender. The healing is in refusing to give that gift away. Right? Reclaiming your tenderness as your right to stay tender, even though someone may have done some things that would be really understandable if you hardened your heart about.
Again, so invitational.
Yeah.
and it feels so expansive.
Yeah.
So I think normally that pain causes us to like crumble in on ourselves.
Yes.
And just hearing you talk about that tenderness feels like taking a deep breath and just feeling that expansion.
Yes, absolutely. And I do think that when we are hurting, we want to close.
Yeah.
And when we are healing, we tend to open. And and that's a big oversimplification, but those two postures I think are very often related to, numbing and hiding or being open to our own pain and to the pain of others.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a story you tell towards the end about name calling.
Mm-hmm.
I had never considered that name calling is like innocence being destroyed, but that was so helpful for people who've been called divisive or Jezebel spirit or a temptress or wicked or whatever it is. It's like, it's that sense of innocence. Like, I never thought of myself that way, but if this person in charge is calling me this, I must be this.
Yes.
And you, again, give us this visual of imagine yourself in the middle of this circle of people calling all the names, and you just walk out and walk down the hill towards yourself or whatever it is. And that removing yourself from that circle and looking back and realizing that they're still standing around calling names because it was never about you. It was about them.
That's right. That's right.
How transformative.
Yes. Yes, because again, we as humans, we're meaning makers. We want to make meaning of our pain. But so often we make the wrong meaning. That when someone calls us names, we're trying to understand, what does this mean? It hurts so much. Maybe it's true.
Yeah.
But it's not. That kind of pain and toxicity always is coming from the name caller. It is coming out of them being lobbed at you. And you talked about innocence, that sometimes it's the shock of having never been called this name before that makes it stick almost, because you never expected to be called this. And then you start to wonder, do they know something about me that I don't? Right?
Yeah.
It starts to put in this self-doubt. But as you said, it never was about you. If we were to really break it down, the name didn't start with you. It started with the person calling you that and their story. It may have nothing to do with you, in fact.
Huge. That illustration for me was worth the price of admission. Although there were many things that were worth it.
Yes, good. Well, that was one of my favorite parts of the book to write, actually. So I'm glad that was
It shows
meaningful.
because it shows. As we wrap up, we're talking about recognizing our pain and looking for ways to give names. And you give so many names in the book that people should just get the book and find it for themselves. But I want to end on this note of like hope for people. And you're right at the very beginning, this idea that Dr. Barnes was kind of the first person to help you finally name your pain.
Yeah.
What did that feel like for you? And for people who are doing that work to try to find a name, what is your hope for them?
My hope would be that the false stories that they've believed about themselves can be retold. They can be rewritten as in a more truthful way. That would be my hope, because when you have unnamed pain, it's not just innocuous sitting by. It's typically casting a shadow or a narrative over your life. And so my hope for people would be, as they investigate, whether it's this book or other books or podcasts, what's going on with them, that they'd be able to begin to understand they're not their pain and they're not the stories that they've believed about themselves from the pain. There is so much hope in really understanding your own belovedness and your own lovability. That doesn't mean that everything's perfect or fixed, but it's a really, really peaceful place to rest and to live from.
Thank you. If people are looking for you, where can they find or connect with you?
They can find me on Instagram. I'm at Monica DiCristina, and DiCristina has no H in it. That's a common mistake. Or my website is monicadicristina.com. And from there, you can sign up for my newsletter, which is really my favorite way to communicate with people and find out where my book is. It's everywhere that books are sold. And yeah, so Instagram and my website.
Which are both very popular. And we'll have all those links in the show notes.
Thank you.
Everyone, go get a copy of Your Pain Has a Name, a therapist's invitation to understanding your story and sorting out who you are from what hurts. We'll provide links for everyone in the show notes. Monica, thank you so much. This was such a delight.
Thank you so much. I really love talking to you.
What an incredible conversation. If you enjoyed it as much as I did, be sure to follow Monica and say thanks for being on the show. You can find links and all the things in the show notes. Coming up on the show, we have Elise Heard, Ben Kramer, Dr. Ariel Schwartz, and so many more. Next time, we'll be talking with Megan Hampton about her work online and in real life with soul care for families. Subscribe or follow the show to get new episodes automatically. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating and review or share with your friends. It really helps us to grow and continue providing quality content for you. And a special thank you to our listeners who make this show possible through their financial support. If this show is valuable to you, consider donating today at the link in the show notes. This episode was hosted and executive produced by me, Brian Lee. Editing by Heidi Kritz and post-production by Lisa Carnegas. Thanks for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope it's been helpful. Here's to moving toward healing and wholeness together. I'll see you next time.